Hello, and welcome to Good News Rhode Island. We're about to begin our next year, and we're here with Tony Estrella in his inner sanctum. And I have to say, it's great to be here to the Gamm Theater, the new Gamm Theater, the new look, the new outlook, etc.
Yeah.
So thank you, Tony.
Welcome. Thank you for coming over.
Thanks for having us. I have to say, I walked in here and I thought, wait a minute, this doesn't look like Tony, because I think of your mind as being filled. Tony, the playwright, the actor, the executive producer, the executive director of the Gamm Theater is a treasure in Rhode Island, in my opinion. But I always think of your mind as being so full of all these fabulous lines from Shakespeare, and that's a very trite word to use for him, but anyway. Just these lines of depth and meaning, and everything you do in life must seem like it's reflected in those lines. Is that true?
Absolutely. Well, when I think we all have that, and if you're fortunate enough to kind of, immerse yourself or have the ability, because of the theater, to immerse yourself in great literature, like I get to do, it's a great privilege. And so, when we make the art, we're constantly looking for ways of, how do we personalize it, So it's one thing that just, we want to do a Shakespeare play because Shakespeare was great. And well, why? Because he, somehow is things he had to say about human nature, how we tick, what makes us tick, I should say, still matters to us. And, then I get to kind of, and of course he's so much more articulate. And he puts all of the kind of inchoate ideas that we have about ourselves, he's able to give them expression in these kind of beautiful words. And so when I'm sitting there thinking of, I've got this going on, or this going on, and I'm feeling this, but I can't really articulate it, usually there's somebody somewhere in Shakespeare that does a better job than I could ever do. So we get to kind of, he actually helps us live our experience by articulating it for us, and we find our way into it. So it's quite a privilege to work on his plays in particular. And then, as long as my memory stays intact, kind of carrying those things around with me, they tend to help frame things in daily life. And I hope so, and ultimately what we want is for the audience to feel the same thing. My brother, who has been coming to see theater because I've been involved in it in a long time, he doesn't necessarily read Shakespeare, kind of like, just sometimes he does, but he doesn't study it, but he loves it. And I love his responses when he comes to see plays, because he'll, especially Shakespeare, because at the end of the night, I'll see him afterwards, and what'd you think about the show, or whatever, we start talking about it, and he always goes right to the language, and he says, what was that line you said when you said, repeat that for me, you need to write it down, and I want it, because he wants to carry it around, because something was so perfect about the way it articulated his experience, that he wanted to, it's like, I could never say it better myself, and I didn't know I thought that, and now I do, right? And I think that's the experience that great literature and great plays can bring us.
And so that happens with modern plays that you're doing for the first time, or that you're introducing to the world.
Yeah, no question. We're doing a play as we speak. We're rehearsing a play called JQA, which is only the second production. JQA meaning John Quincy Adams, and it's this really kind of incredible work that looks at John Quincy Adams' life from the time he's 9 years old in 1776 to the year he dies, which is 1847, when he was 80. And that remarkable span of life. But it's a modern play, but it uses that history, that 70 years of the kind of birth of the country and the formation of the country, right up to the eve, or kind of like the decade before the Civil War, basically, to say, to ask questions about right now. So it's an incredibly contemporary play, even though it's looking at history, and that's the wonderful thing about theater, is it can do both at the same time. And so a lot of that play, the language in that play, is really resonating, based on kind of John Quincy Adams' life, and then all these historical figures that kind of come through his life, from his father, George Washington, to his mother, of course, Abigail, to Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln, who he actually was really kind of intriguing. I didn't know this. They actually were in Congress at the same time for a month and a half before John Quincy Adams died. So imagine that, So anyway, so to your point, that contemporary and modern plays do the same thing. They give us a way of refracting our lives and kind of articulating experience that is that only art can do.
There's almost nothing about life that's not in some play or another.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it draws everything. So you read political work, you read comedy, you read plays, you read poetry, you read the newspaper, I'm sure.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
And all of this informs your work.
Every day, yeah. I mean, when people ask me, like, what do you do? Like, what's your job like? And there's a lot of things that I do. You mentioned a bunch of them, writing plays and acting in plays and directing plays and producing plays and all this stuff. So there's a lot of facets in this kind of work that we do. And what a privilege it is that I get to do all of that. So I always say the theater is a great, magpie's profession, because each play you do, of course, is a different world, So we just look around the kind of the posters on the wall, that some of the plays that we've done, and I'm just looking and I see there's a Schiller play over there that's about, it's a political play based on Mary Stuart, which is about queens and Elizabeth and Mary Stuart, and the power play there, which we kind of adapted to reflect kind of what was happening in our world around the last election. And then next to that is a play by Tom Stoppard called Arcadia, which is about, it was one of the greatest plays ever written, which ultimately it's about a lot of things, but it's about landscape architecture and physics, and you go, I don't know anything about those things. I study that play, I want to bring it to an audience, I get to kind of live in that world for a while, And so each play we do, we get the privilege of traveling there. It's like a passport coming to the theater.
Is the audience ready for you?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So they're ready to go wherever you go. They're ready to follow you.
Yeah, I think if I do my job well, I think if we do our jobs well, I should say. We know, for instance, that with take Shakespeare, because we started talking about him, that sometimes audiences will come in. Certain people in the audience will come in because of experience they may have had in high school, or bad teacher in college or something, or their first experiences with Shakespeare, and think, the language is really deep, and sometimes it's hard, and I don't understand it. It seems like it's a different language, and so they might be a little reticent based on their own experience. Our job, of course, is to be the interpreters, to come in and say, no, our job is to make it absolutely clear, and to prove its worth, that it is for you. I have no interest in doing plays or producing anything that's going to kind of make the audience go, oh, I don't get it. You know what I mean? Even if it's difficult material. I mean, I can recognize some of the difficulties in Shakespeare. I can recognize some of the difficulties in a Tom Stoppard play, for instance. Like I said, I knew nothing about landscape architecture, and I know the audience shouldn't have to know anything about landscape architecture. It sounds like the most dramatically inert play. I assure you, it's the greatest play in the world. But it's our jobs then to kind of, we do all the research, we do all the kind of building and creating, and you're just here to see a story. You come in to be moved by a story, by human beings kind of, like us, going after desires, things like that we want in our lives, and either getting them or not, failing, triumphing, all that stuff. And but so it's our job to take away any of the kind of, homework. We do the homework. You come in to kind of have the experience. So I think audiences absolutely are, because they need to trust us that we're going to take care of them.
You inhabit a character, or it inhabits you.
Yeah. Is that a question?
Yes.
Yeah. I think, I think maybe it's a risk of, I don't know, playing both sides.
You don't need to say.
No, it's kind of both, I think.
Yeah.
I think, sometimes people who aren't actors from the outside, we love stories of actors who, we think become the character. Famous stories of Al Pacino is playing a cop, so he thinks he can arrest people on the street or something, or Daniel Day-Lewis sees the ghost of his father on stage playing Hamlet. And those stories get blown up and romanticized, and so that we think there's something almost religious about acting, like you actually transform, and it's not that. I always like to think that character is something that is never finished in a play until the audience comes in, So I have the words on the page that the playwright gives me as an actor, and then I have my experiences, and so there's and what I bring to it, So when I come into the rehearsal process, I'm trying to bridge that gap that there might be, right? And infuse the character as written by the playwright with everything I have. But there's another element.
Everything you are.
Everything I am, right? Because we've got 4 weeks of rehearsal, right? To make a new person. I've been working for 49 years on this guy, you know what I mean? That's a lot of rehearsal, you know what I mean? So I can bring that, and then the playwright's giving me what to say, So I bridge that gap in the rehearsal process using my imagination, using my personalization. But then the final thing is you in the audience, that you come and you sit there and you create my character, right? You're making decisions about who I am and what's motivating me as much as I am. And so we share that. So it's a wonderful thing about the theater is the creation of the character is created night after night after night with different audiences every time, And what Bill might say when he, if he came to the same show as you, he may have a slightly different interpretation of my character than you had, because you're bringing stuff to it, individual things,
Hamlet, for example.
Right, absolutely, yeah. There's a reason why we do Hamlet over and over and over again. One, it's the
It's
greatest
like a
play ever
liturgy.
written.
I think it's like a liturgy.
Because it redefines itself every time. And everyone who plays Hamlet, if you have the privilege of playing that role, it's going to change it based on the person it is. So that when I get very lucky to have played that role, and the Hamlet that I was very different than any other Hamlet you would see, and that's the reason why you come back to it, because there's something about the infinite depth of the writing, of the character that Shakespeare has created and the story that allows, and that we have a desire, a need, a want to see it kind of refracted over and over again for the present moment it is in. So a Hamlet played today, is going to mean something very different than a Hamlet played at this time last year, and certainly the last time I did it, which was, 10 years ago or something like that, I'd have to, if we were going to do it tomorrow, we would have to look at that play refracted through the prism of everything that's happening in our world right now, and that's going to change the tenor of it. It's going to speak to us differently today than it did even a year ago.
So you put different emphasis on different lines, or
you're going to put different emphasis on everything. All of a sudden, it might have not struck you 10 years ago, that Denmark's a prison, for instance, which is a line, right? Or something's rotten in the state of Denmark, and all of a sudden, based on your relationship to our political and cultural life, that line may hit you like a bullet between the eyes in a way that it wouldn't have struck you in less turbulent times, let's say, or how the society of Denmark, for instance, in Hamlet, and what's depicted is so much more maybe like ours today than maybe we would have thought several years ago, right? I certainly would make that argument. It would resonate with me more, and so all of a sudden Hamlet's experience within this corrupt political establishment becomes a much more direct, has a much more direct impact on the audience than it might have if we weren't in such tumultuous political times.
So it's bridging the art and life
constantly.
Gap, I guess.
And theater is always present. It's always happening, right as we're doing it. It's not a past activity. It's not a future activity. It's asking a bunch of people to come into a room and share a story in the moment. And so that moment means everything. Even if we're telling a historical story, right? The events of Hamlet historically take place in like 12th century Denmark or something. The JQA, for instance, is happening 200 years ago in our country's history, and yet we're doing it now. So it has to matter right now. It has to speak to us now, or it just feels like a dead painting that we walk by at the museum and don't feel.
Some dusty thing.
Yeah, they haven't. Yeah.
With John Quincy Adams' house right up the road.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to have that depth that the audience can learn more by going to the John Quincy Adams house. And, and
I was up there a couple of weeks ago. And
it's gorgeous.
It's gorgeous, and his, the house that they lived in, the places where they were born, he and his father were born, and you look at the kind of cumulative history of that family that is kept at Peacefield, and it's not that the audience has to go there to enjoy the play, but it certainly enhanced my understanding of the work I was doing. And again, that's my job in order to bring that. So all of that work kind of infuse and hopefully makes richer the work on the play, and that you'll, even if you don't necessarily get every factoid or anything else, that the audience feels that richness.
His library.
Yeah,
for example.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Okay, we need to go back to the Gamm.
Yeah.
You're here. It's new. You have a completely different stage, completely different dimensions.
Yeah.
The audience feels completely different than they did in that impacted tiny space that kept constantly being part of the. To me, it was always part of the play.
Yeah.
That space was part of the play. I wanted you to have this space here.
Yeah, and we do. I think we do. I think we only added 2 rows, and as we keep saying over and over again, the best thing that happened last year, and certainly there was some trepidatiousness around it, was creating that our black box performance space here. So we went from 135 seats in Pawtucket to 185 seats. So that was 2 more rows we added. So it's only a few more feet of actual audience, right? But we have a lot more verticality. So after that first show, which was Night of the Iguana, which we opened last season with, we kind of breathed a sigh of relief because the audience was feeling what we were hoping they would feel, and that what we were feeling as performers, which is it was the same kind of feeling that we had. That intimacy is still there. I can still see that. I can still see the furthest person away. I can see their eyes, from the stage, and that's important to me as a performer and as an artistic director. That on that stage, I can look at you in the 8th row and go, "Hey, how you doing?" you know, and I know it's you back there, you know, and so I have that relationship, and I think that's always important to what we do. But the verticality, the kind of, we keep joking that, you know, the Gamm just feels like the Pawtucket Gamm just kind of feels like we inhaled our lungs, you know, we inhaled our breath into our lungs and kind of just expanded a little bit, just kind of went like this. But the dynamic is essentially the same, because the intimacy of the experience, you know, telling these epic stories in an intimate way is fundamental to who we are, and what the, you know, the identity of the theater, what makes us, I think, different maybe than some other spaces. I think we've retained that here and allowed for a slightly more comfortable audience experience and a slightly more comfortable artistic experience from the actor's side, so that the space itself is actually allowing us to do more. You know, for instance, we opened last season with Night of the Iguana, and that's set at this kind of ramshackle hotel in the rainforest in Mexico. And you know, for the first time in the history of the Gamm, we were able to have 2 floors on a set, legitimately, like another level, right? So there was a veranda balcony kind of on the hotel, and you could stand up there without hitting your head on a light, you know? We never could do that in the Pawtucket space, right? So we if we had a kind of 2-story set, it was like a story and a half that we could visually kind of try to trick you into believing existed, you know, stairways that went nowhere and all that kind of stuff, like an M.C. Escher painting, you know? But we don't have to do that now. We can actually have some space to kind of grow into, which is nice too.
You have a backstage now.
Yeah.
I read, and you have side stages.
Yeah, we have wing space.
Wing
we can
space.
build into the black box backstage space. We have proper dressing rooms, you know. I mean, where you can actually like sit down and have a mirror, and you know, versus kind of crawling all over each other to find a little bit of space, you know. And that's important to the experience for the performers and the artists as well, that they have a space that's more is more conducive to their focus. You know?
Yes, I would think so.
I mean, you know, and that's a really, really important thing. You know, doing a little. So it's interesting. You know, I've been fortunate to do a little bit of film work in my life as an actor too. And when you're on a film set, or you know, actors get treated like, compared to the theater, it's like unbelievable. Like, really, I don't, you know, you have a little room to yourself and a trailer and all these other things, and people carry things for you and they feed you constantly. It's amazing, right? You almost have to do nothing for yourself. And you're like, this seems all like too much. Like, I could do that, and I don't really need that guy to help me with that. But then you go, oh, what they're doing, so much more at stake financially in that business, right, is they want to assure that, and maybe they go overboard a little bit, but they want to assure that actors have all the space they need in order to focus on their performance, you know what I mean? So that the only thing that they really have to focus on is the work, because film work is really hard, you know, that focus that's going to be required, you know. And so it's nice here to have a space that is conducive to that kind of focus for actors, and that there's just a few small things that make their experience that much more calming, and that there's enough anxiety, right? You know,
I
before
can't
going
imagine.
on stage
Yes.
every night, you know.
First performance, definitely.
Oh my goodness, yeah. You know, still feel it every time.
Mm-hmm. The curtain, you don't have a curtain. You don't want a proscenium.
No, not that we don't. We're actually going to use the larger space here. There's the way the space works is that we kind of perform most of our work in this a black box, but we remove the curtain that's behind the seats, remove the seats, and then we've got a proscenium arch. You know, we've got this 300-seat theater we use mostly for rentals, but we're actually going to use it for the first time for It's a Wonderful Life. Which I'm going to be in, which I can't wait to start, which will start in a few weeks. And so we're going to use a more traditional space for this kind of wonderfully warm, traditional kind of piece, you know. And so it'll be fun to work in there, because I haven't worked in a space like that a while. So it's almost radical. It was funny when I was young, and the first Broadway show I ever saw, it wasn't until I was in college. And I started to study theater, and a friend of mine had gotten like free tickets to see Grease, right? And it was a revival of Grease on Broadway. But I had never seen a Broadway show. I'm not a big musical theater lover and stuff like that. But so I went in to see this big, here's a Broadway musical spectacle, right? And it was a proscenium arch, and it was Grease, and it was crazy. There was a huge set, and it was all sorts of stuff, and it was all sorts of bells and whistles, and it was actually really fun. It was a great show. And but to me, Grease seemed like radical, because I had never really made theater like that before. So it was like I was going to something avant-garde, you know, and it was Grease. It was the least avant-garde thing ever made. But when you grow up here at Trinity, you know, Rep, you know, and Eugene Lee, and the way they created theater there, the way I was taught to create theater, I was used to seeing things that for other people was avant-garde, but for me was just run-of-the-mill. That's how we do it. That's how you tell stories, right? And so when I'm looking really forward to jumping into the kind of more traditional setup for It's a Wonderful life, just because it's going to feel radical a little bit, because we don't do it all the time. So I'm interested in exploring that.
See if you get a different audience.
Yeah, too. Who knows? You know what I mean? I think we'll get a lot of the same audiences, and because it's a holiday piece, there may be some people who don't come. So that puts the onus to other plays, I mean, here. So that puts the onus on us to also provide them a unique kind of Gamm experience too, you know, and to kind of encourage them to say, hey, come on back and see something else too.
So have the audiences been consistent with the audiences that you had in Pawtucket?
Yeah, we actually grew last year coming here, which was really great. Our subscriptions went up, single ticket sales went up, and I think that was part and parcel to seeing the new space and also the quality of the work, you know, and that you know, a lot of people, some people from the northern part of the state were like, oh, I'm going to have to drive 15 more minutes, and so I would always try to convince them by saying, give us a shot, you know, because I think the impact on the work will make that 15 minutes, you know, feel like nothing, you know, and I think that has been borne out. So, but on the other hand, South County, East Greenwich area, you know, now we're much more accessible to that part of the state. So that's you know,
a lot of theater goers there, I bet.
Yes, absolutely, and we've
not having to go through Providence.
Yes, you know, yeah.
So you have other things that you offer here besides wonderful theater.
Sure. Yeah, we have a lot of stuff. Well, we have got this much bigger building, right, that you know, is big for us, and it's a big leap forward from what we did in Pawtucket. So we have this bigger lobby space, we have a bigger theater space, so we have classroom space here that all of which is utilized in many, many ways, not the least of which is by renting, you know, so holding events for other organizations to come in and rent the space, any of the spaces. So we have a lot of that activity going around our production season. We're encouraging people to come in and see what we've got here if they'd like to use it. We have been doing, we just started this season a series of once a month community nights where we're inviting on Monday nights local organizations from our local community, from right around the neighborhood, to come in and tell their stories, you know, in our space, in the lobby space, and invite other people to be kind of a community, you know, kind of focal point, you know, some place where people can come in and say, hey, what do we do here? We tell stories, you know, what's your story? Does your neighbor know your story, you know? And if they don't, why not come and invite them and say, hey, this is what we do, this is who we are. And so we're trying to forge some relationships that way and more community, get people more used to, you know, having an artistic venue, which is, you know, I always see as not just a performance venue, but we're a civic venue, right? We're a civic institution that is about, you know, that is about connecting people, you know, and having conversations about the way we live in all sorts of ways, whether it's, you know, politically and socially, culturally, or it's just about the work we're doing in the community together, what's happening at the, you know, we have a living community next to us called Weatherfields Commons right down the street over here. And it's a huge place where all these people live, and it's kind of off the road. It's its own little village. What is that like? Like, what is that living like there? What's your community like? It's almost a community within a community. And here we are right around the corner saying, you know, come over here and see what we're doing, and then tell your story to other folks, you know, and then all of the great kind of social service organizations that we have around here, businesses, etc. We can become a place where, you know, people can come in and share together, and then, you know, it's like that thing, how well do you know your next door neighbor, right? Sometimes you live next to them for years, and you know, other than an occasional, hey, how you doing, over the fence, you really don't know anything about them, and you know, and it's we want to rectify that, and we think it's a great responsibility for an artistic organization to have, because that's what we do. We're saying, come on in and let's talk.
Building community,
Building
obviously.
community, yeah. And of course education as well. You know, our education programs continue, and you know, we have a small but mighty education staff that's all over the place. You know, was heavily invested in Pawtucket, and we're still there, and now we're able to expand with a central location and getting out to the rest of the state. You know, just this morning, you know, we're taping this, it's a show right in there, we're bussing in third graders to come and see a great adaptation of a book called Judy Moody and Stink and the Great Treasure Hunt, I think it is, and which I saw yesterday, which was fantastic. To have the energy in that room with you know, a few adults chaperones, but then mostly, you know, 7 and 8 year old kids.
And it's okay to go to the theater.
It's okay to go to the theater and to respond and to be alive at it and to have a live experience. You know, it was funny, they gave a little curtain speech beforehand, and Susie, who's our education director, said, okay, everybody, now shut off your cell phones. And I was like, they're 8. And I was like, wait a minute, of course they have cell phones. And some of them said, I don't have a cell phone. And then other ones, but I do, and they shut it off, you know, so it was cute. And but it was incredibly energizing to see how live they were and what they were taking from that experience and their interactive experience. You know, because we're living in a time where if we choose to, we can engage so much of the world right through the thing that's in our pockets. and it's wonderful tool, right? It's an amazing thing what it can do for us, but it's not a live experience. It's not an interactive human experience. And so theater can be a great antidote and supplement to that kind of interface. So
and just hearing the reaction of the rest of the audience is important.
oh my God, yeah,
seems to me.
it's a collective, right?
Yes.
We're together in this,
Yeah.
you know, and it's not this isolated experience where I, you know, and then I have to think about how I'm dealing with the world, you know, and I think it's a healthier conversation if I'm actually concerned with what I'm saying in public versus the isolation of I can just say something awful because no one will know who did it, and I'm kind of hiding in my own anonymity of my bedroom or my office or something like that.
It's very flat, too.
Yeah, it's very flat. Versus the theater, you actually have to look somebody in the eye, and that's hard. You know, it's easy to criticize somebody or say something awful if you're not looking at them, but try looking them in the eye and saying the same thing. And what you recognize is your capacity for empathy will, you know, dull that hopefully and change that, complexify that, and that's what we offer in the theater.
You have schools here for raising the next generation of actors, is that right?
Right. Yeah. We have we hold adult classes as well, but they're, you know, not necessarily just adult classes and teenagers and stuff, but mainly adult classes for you know, kind of lifelong education, and people who want to come and get you know, actors who want to stay sharp, you know, or beginners. So from everything, whatever your level of experience is, we offer something that you can come in and kind of advance your work as a performer, or even if you just want to, if it's not about performing, it's not, you don't have any intention of, you know, getting up there and becoming an actor, but you want to overcome anxiety in terms of being in front of people, or you just want to learn something new, you want to explore a great piece of dramatic literature from a deeper thing. I think even for people who just want to be better audience members or have a more fuller experience as an audience member, I think taking an acting class is an amazing thing, you know, because you kind of learn a little bit of the inside out of it. You know, you learn to appreciate what is going into it and how difficult a job it is as well. And I think it brings more to your experience as an audience as well. So it's, yeah, so we offer, you name it, we got it. Let's
talk about this year's 35th anniversary.
Yeah, it's a birthday, right?
Production, right?
Yeah, 35 years in many locations.
Yeah,
kind of
lots of history.
Right.
Even fires and moving.
Oh my God, fires,
Yes.
you name it, everything. You know, the ups and downs of an organization that has managed to kind of go this long. And our first year and the kind of anniversary of 1 year in this new space and what that means for the future. So there's a lot of transition going on here and has been for some time. So this 35th year, and you know, thinking about what it was going to be. Normally, this would be a year. We usually do Shakespeare every other year. It's been a kind of an ongoing kind of standard for us. But we didn't do it this year. This would have been a year to do it. And because going into an election year and thinking about, I was thinking about like what are the stories that, you know, we need right now in a sense. And I was very concerned with having as kind of an American a year as possible. You know, we often find a lot of the plays we do from overseas and England in particular, and so I was thinking about let's have a full American season. What are the stories that we can tell? And we haven't done that. I don't know that we've ever done that. So this is a kind of America year, and all the plays are written by American writers, and you know, with two of them in particular, with JQA, which I've been talking about, which is coming up next, opens on October 24th, and Assassins, Stephen Sondheim's Assassins, which is a musical, our first musical, right? You know, people have made a big deal about that. You know, those are two plays that almost are connected from the last scene of JQA to the first scene of Assassins. It almost tells the entire history from a certain angle of America. You know, so you go from 1776 through the beginning of the Civil War. The last scene of JQA is John Quincy Adams, an old John Quincy Adams, and a very young Abraham Lincoln. And he's kind of passing on the baton to Lincoln, saying, go and do something. Of course, we know what Lincoln did, you know, and then Assassins begins with Lincoln's assassination. You know, and that musical kind of looks at the history of the country from that point forward, at through the lens of all of the assassinations and attempted assassinations of presidents up until John Hinckley and Ronald Reagan. So it almost takes us up to the now, right? And certainly, it's a play called Assassins, and how we deal and how we see kind of our relationship with the presidency, which is something that kind of is a big question for all of us right now, is like, what do we want our president to be? What does the president mean? You know, so it's a vital play to be doing right now. And those two plays together kind of give us the whole kit and caboodle almost. It's a kind of an overview of the 200 and almost 50 years of our country's official history as a nation.
I want to thank you so much for being with us today. Come to the Gamm. It's the best experience you can possibly have in theater. Thank you, Tony Estrella, and thank you for all your hats that you wear and the wonderful things you bring to Rhode Island, and probably people come from beyond as well.
Yeah.
And best wishes with this new theater.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching Good News Rhode Island. We're sure that there's good news around you, and probably you're helping to make it.